Hello, this is Trade Misconception. This is the channel where we put our misconceptions on the table and we trade them for knowledge and seek out the truth. Now, let's get started. I wanted to talk today about the economic theory called modern monetary theory and kind of go over this and see if this is actually something that has some validity to it. So let's get started. So let me go through the rundown of what modern monetary theory is. Modern monetary theory, MMT, basically states that a government can print money at its own leisure and not have to worry about running deficits. And pretty much what the government has to worry about in this situation is controlling for inflation. So what they do is they can run deficits, print money, get stuff actually paid for in the economy. And what they'll have to do is they'll have to control for inflation. So that's when they use taxes as a lever for inflation in the economy. So basically, the taxes are running as a lever for inflation. So this is something that needs to be constantly monitored in the economy. The inflation, to fight the inflation or to increase the inflation, depending on the scenario. And the taxes would be set accordingly to take this money out of the economy to prevent inflation of the economy. This seems to be a promising theory for a lot of people, especially big government people who want to see increased government spending for programs. And honestly, I mean, it's probably a good theory for people who claim to not be big government but still run high deficits. I think you know who I'm talking about. Another part of this theory actually states that running government surpluses leads to private deficits, which can trigger a recession in the economy. So I was reading this Vox article, and they went over it, and they were saying that the downturn in 2001 recession was the result of U.S. fiscal surplus at the time, forcing the private sector into deficit. So when the government is running deficits, it actually sells a treasury bond to a private holder of the bond. That holder will get paid by the government to hold government debt. So the government will pay that holder. The treasury bond market actually creates a new non-government sector. It creates a financial asset for a non-government sector and actually supplies liquidity to the banks and lending sectors to lend out to the private sector so that they aren't running deficits. So this aspect of higher government deficits equaling higher private savings is something that the MMT crowd is holding to. So basically it's stating that during times of high government borrowing, aka deficits, the private savings actually increases, so there's a private surplus at those times, and it's the inverse for the opposite. So during times of government budget surpluses, there's a private deficit in the economy. And basically it's stating that whenever the government is spending more money, people typically tend to save at that time because they're worried about taxes going up in the future or whatever. They typically tend to save. So that they believe that the reason the economy overheated in 2001 and led to a slight recession was because the government had a surplus. So there was increased deficit in the private economy, so increased lending. So it actually overheated at that time and led to a recession. So yeah, some of these treasury bonds can actually not technically reach the U.S. private sector economy or private economy. Some of them actually end up getting bought up by the Federal Reserve, and then some of them get bought by foreign owners that would like to hold the U.S. Treasury bond. So yeah, some of the things that some opponents are a little worried about with MMT is the fact that MMT, a lot of people feel that MMT is beholden to the U.S. remaining a world's reserve currency. So other nations still wanting to buy our debt and use our dollar. And that's a big concern for other people regarding MMT, because if the Federal Reserve keeps printing the way it does currently, what gives the other countries incentive to purchase our debt and to be beholden to our fiat money trap? And that has a lot of other people concerned. I mean, we know right now that there are some countries, Russia being one of them, that are actually, storing up gold right now, which is a big concern for the fiat monetary system. I don't know. They're making a bet that the U.S. economy may crash, and they want to have their currency pegged to gold right now. Also, another thing to take into account is that the U.S. actually runs a trade deficit. So that means that these other countries are becoming flush with U.S. dollars, but they have no option but to invest it back into our economy some way, somehow. So that's the thing going on right now that is a actual benefit to us, despite still having a trade deficit at the moment. Now the problem is, down the road, some of these nations could decide to start dumping U.S. dollars. They don't feel the intrinsic value behind having that U.S. dollar and what it's attached to, especially if they know that trillions of it can be printed, within the matter of like a year. So that's a big issue concerning it. A lot of people are saying the reason we are able to hold the world's reserve currency is because we have the world's largest military. This kind of smacks in the face of the people who actually support MMT, because the side that supports MMT is generally the side that wants to decrease military spending and decrease the size of our military in general. So that's one of the issues that a lot of people see with this is, well, how are you going to enforce the US dollar being the world reserve currency and give us this special status of being able to print at our will and continue to run these deficits without any repercussions from it? I mean, we know some other countries in the past that have done something similar to this, although proponents of MMT say that it's not similar, but on paper it looks similar. We know Weimar Germany did this, Zimbabwe did this, and it eventually led to hyperinflation. They tried to print their way out of their economic woes. The thing is, they say that now with MMT, it will be it will be monitored closely to ensure that there is no inflation, and they're going to use taxes to combat inflation during this, using this MMT theory. Now, I wanted to go over what proponents of the MMT say that it can make available to people. One of the big ones would be Medicare for All, help pay for Medicare for All using MMT. Also, another one would be full employment. So that would be anyone who wants a job can have a job. They will be employed by the government, nonprofit, private sector. That would be a different case, but MMT would enable the government and nonprofit to hire any people that need a job, and the proponents would, want a $15 minimum wage for all these jobs. And because MMT allows the government to not worry about deficits, this could be possible. Now, I still have my concerns with MMT. I'm still not fully sold on it, but it does seem to be a pretty promising thing. I believe some more studies will need to be done on MMT, run a simulation on how MMT would work. Now, with MMT, the thing is, you would need to closely monitor the economy, and it would get to a point where, because they use taxes as a lever against inflation, the tax rate would be a very dynamic tax rate and could change on a whim in order to fight inflation or to fight deflation in the economy. So that's one thing to take into account. Yeah, so MMT would enable tax cuts at certain periods of the time, because we know that taxes won't be necessary to fund our public projects, any government spending into the economy, things of that nature. But taxes will be needed to fight inflation, fight deflation, and keep the economy rolling. Also, taxes give money its intrinsic value. That's pretty much the only intrinsic value that the US dollar has, is the ability to pay taxes with it. So yeah, these are some interesting theories behind this. A lot of people are very optimistic about MMT because it means that we can finally start, pushing forth these social programs, these bigger social programs such as government subsidized college, government provided healthcare, can get our public works projects underway and start rebuilding the infrastructure without having to go through a private-public partnership and resulting in toll roads. So yeah, this is an interesting concept. I'm still a little bit on the fence about it, but it does seem pretty promising. Let me know what you think in the comments. Thank you for watching the video.